Wojak sat there in his old Honda Accord, hands down at his side, his back pressed into the worn felt of the seat, his eyes almost glassy, staring out into the darkness of the ocean that lay before him. An entire ocean, completely black, the moon having been hidden by one of the thin patches of soft charcoal gray clouds that wafted through the star-strewn sky. The yellow light of an aged street lamp illuminated Wojak's face through the slightly muddled glass of the Accord's windshield, revealing a man aged beyond his years, and yet there was something behind that. A yearning, or perhaps a hopeful gleam now shined from the man's dark eyes, nearly invisible dark rings underlining the eyes that stared almost unblinkingly at the calm ocean that stretched endlessly before him. A quiet confidence was there as well, deeper than the hope that could be seen within his pale visage, a confidence that didn't seem to belong, a confidence that for some reason should have been alien to him. Wojak winced as he heard the muffled voices of the men standing just off to his left, speaking to one another casually as a new car pulled into the lonely parking lot. It was a slightly older Ford Mustang, red, shining even in the relative darkness of the night. Wojak watched the man out of the corner of his eye as he pushed open the Mustang's door and was on his feet the next second, grabbing a plate carrier out of his passenger seat and easily placing it on. The man wore a gray camo long-sleeve shirt and tan cargo pants, along with a thick brown leather belt and black boots. He too seemed to carry a confidence that simply didn't belong, though one look and one could tell that there was something amiss. Not in the man's character per se, but rather a slight physical abnormality that often coincided with deficiencies that went deeper than simply the physical. Wojak's heart began to beat just a little faster as the man slowly strode to the two men in black, glancing down to see the timer on his dashboard read 7:30. Wojak winced again, this time a little harder, memories flooding back to him, drawing the entirety of his focus for but a single moment, before he tore himself away and reluctantly opened his car door. Wojak stepped out of the car, his shin-high brown boots and thick burlap brown pants not exactly the smooth look of a cold-blooded operator. But regardless of that, they were tough and reliable, and that was all Wojak needed. Wojak slung his layered Kevlar plates over his shoulder and the thick brown belt that carried his magazine pouches around his waist. Both pieces of equipment far more elegant in their royal appearance than was common in the modern world. Kevlar plates that once gleamed silver, as well as bearing the terrifying symbol of the Stahl Army's Iron Eagle, before being painted over with a dull gray. His magazine pouches carried a gold thread that wove a beautiful medieval design into each of the leather strands. Wojak slung his G-36 over his shoulder and began to walk toward the trio of men, the palm of his right hand unconsciously pressing against the butt of his Glock 22, holstered neatly against his right hip. The other man, the other mercenary hired for this job, looked up and nodded at Wojak. Wojak paused for a second before returning this nod. Not a talker. Wojak liked that. He had never been much of a conversationalist himself, and preferred to talk with other employees as little as possible. The closest man in black, a thinly built, tall man with an angular chin and a small black mustache, threw down the nearly finished gas station cigar and moved to shake Wojak's hand.
Turgan, right? Nice to meet you, this is James McBurger. You guys are both gonna be exploring the rig together.
The man explained, as his obviously self-aggrandizing British accent grated Wojak's ears. Sheems and Wojak looked at one another and shook hands almost robotically, Wojak reciting his tried-and-true line of, "Hey, nice to meet you," with the same plastic smile he always used. It was not lost on either of these men that they would be trusting their lives to the hands of a man they had literally just met. Yet between them, past the awkward smiles and formal greetings, there was a connection between the two, an understanding of what rested just below the facade they presented, where that quiet confidence came from, that they were both in it for the money, and all they needed was another man to watch their back. Alright, so we're a little bit behind schedule, so you guys grab any other gear you need and get into the boat. The other man in black, a younger man in his late 20s, explained as he looked at the military watch on his wrist. Wojak looked the man over. The phrase tactical came to mind. With this man's dirty blonde buzz cut, shining black boots, BDUs that looked so spotless they were most likely new, and a black nylon belt packed with so many different pouches around a 9mm pistol, Wojak was surprised the man could even turn as he began to walk towards the boat. Wojak had seen men like that before, had some training, former military, and thought it made them special, battle-hardened even if they had never seen combat. Wojak had had dozens of instructors like that in Pasek. Looking back, he hoped they were all dead. Both Cheems and Wojak began walking towards the boat, neither apparently needing any more than what they had on them, climbing into the small white and brown speedboat behind the two men in black. Without another word, the man with the British accent grabbed the controls, and the boat swiftly pulled out of the small dock of concrete and wood, and into the inky darkness of the sea. Wojak glanced over his shoulder to see the last glimpse of quickly disappearing shore, the one aging street lamp like one of the many stars barely visible through the thin cloud cover. He wondered if he'd ever see his car again. A strange thing to be nostalgic for, certainly, but that car had been with him since he had gotten out of high school, and perhaps that tethered him to some kind of feeling of normalcy. Normalcy was something Wojak was certainly in need of. This wasn't his first merc job, but all the others had been security, been much more formal, businesslike in a way. But this job came out of nowhere. The employer didn't name themselves, paid in cash up front. Wojak hadn't cared how shady it seemed. Money was money, and this was his business. Had been for a long time. A naive high school senior who wouldn't listen to anyone, thought it would be cool, would make him manly, like something out of a movie. Wojak desperately wished he could go back in time and strangle that boy as he gripped the heat guard of his rifle tighter. But Wojak took a breath and managed to focus his anger on the situation at hand. This job wasn't normal, nothing added up, and he didn't like the two men in black sitting in the front of the boat. Wojak looked down to see that Cheems had his shotgun rested across his lap, the barrel of which was pointed directly at the back of the tall man. The way the mercenary sat, looking out at the water, just able to see the men out of the corner of his eye, his hand just above the trigger, though his pinky still rested upon it. Wojak wasn't exactly sure how to take that. Paranoid, perhaps, but from what he could tell, he liked Cheems. The two men, on the other hand. Wojak casually rested his hand on the butt of his holstered pistol, shifting his leg to rest directly behind the chair of the tactical gentleman. All Wojak knew was that he was in the dark on a lot of what they had been hired to do, and he was fairly certain the other merc was in the same boat. In this case, literally.
All right, gentlemen, since we're getting close to our objective, I thought I'd run through what you're going to be doing.
The man spoke, his tone seemingly trying to be friendly, though the overwhelming smarm still grated on Wojak.
The people who hired you are a pharmaceutical company working on some pretty advanced drugs. The type of thing that bad men might try to steal.
The accented man explained, barely bothering to glance over his shoulder as he drove the speedboat ever forward. Immortality. The younger man spoke aloud, loud enough to where all could hear him above the roar of the engine, yet it almost seemed as if he were talking to himself.
So, your job is going to be first to raise the rig. The platform is kept partially underwater for security purposes. When we reach a small cluster of rocks, there should be a lever at the top of a small set of metal stairs. After it's raised, you two will go aboard the rig and do a quick scouting mission to see why it's been so quiet. It's been over a month since the company's heard from anyone on the platform.
Wojak began to subconsciously grip his holster tighter. Nothing about what these two said made any kind of sense, especially the part about immortality. Not to mention, a month was a long time to not check in on an expensive asset like an underwater rig. And a simple scouting mission? Wojak's luck had never been that good. He felt a small ache in the front of his head, as he knew what was likely to come. It wouldn't be the first time Wojak had been shot at. It wouldn't be the first time he'd shoot someone, if that's what it came down to. But it did make his posture stiffen just a bit, his breath almost unnoticeably becoming more rapid. Combat was a scary thing. Scary in that everything that happened in it was so real, so permanent. The mistakes you made cost everything. Wojak's mind was suddenly cleared when he saw it, and outcropping of rocks jutting from the waves, dwarfing the speedboat. What appeared to be a radio tower piercing the sky as it sat atop the peaks of the rocks. The boat casually pulled up beside the outcropping, a small set of slightly rusted metal stairs leading to the tower just close enough to step to. The driver turned off the engine. The other man in black tying a flimsy white rope around the bottom step lapped with seawater and rust. Without a single word spoken, Cheems exited the boat, followed closely by Wojak as the two, rifles in hand, trudged their way up the stairs. Wojak glanced back over his shoulder. The two men now casually chatting with one another, the smarmy one with his feet up on the dash and a lit gas station cigar in his hand. Wojak paid them little mind from there on. If they had wanted to shoot them in the back, that was their chance. By the time Wojak turned back, they had reached the top of the steps, both casually checking each angle as they neared the base of the radio tower. The apparent lever they were told about was attached to one of the tower's legs. Cheems pulled the thing without much hesitation, and for a moment there was nothing, when suddenly the deep mumble of terrible engines roared from beneath the waves. Wojak hadn't heard anything nearly that powerful in years. The shrieking of brittle, rusted metal like thousands of children screaming in agony. Suddenly, the sound of screaming turned to groans, metal caving in. The radio tower began to list towards the sea as the two mercs backed away onto the metal steps. The radio tower suddenly gave way, falling onto the massive structure rising from the water, a previously unseen support beam collapsing from the cliffside. The two men in black barely had time to scream before the massive slab of metal came down upon them like the hand of some angry giant, dragging them to the ocean floor in a flurry of red foam and gore. Wojak stared at the sight of their ride back being completely destroyed in disbelief, feeling just a bit guilty that the first thing that crossed his mind was whether or not this would affect his pay. Cheems, on the other hand, let out a genuine laugh as he watched the boat disappear below the water before he glanced over at Wojak.
Did you notice I didn't tell us their names?
Cheems asked, his speech impediment making his words hard for Wojak to discern. Despite this, Wojak understood their meaning. And no, he hadn't noticed that.
I could tell you didn't trust them either. That's what made me trust you. Now come on. Those dishes over there might be calm.
Cheems explained as he cautiously climbed onto the radio tower and began to make his way toward the rig where the tower had landed. Wojak looked back at the place where the boat had been, a tiny bit of gore still bobbing on the waves. He then spit in its general direction. Smarmy, annoying, slimy, and now they couldn't even take them back. Yeah, I guess we gotta find some way to get back now, huh? Wojak spoke aloud as he climbed onto the fallen tower. Cheems didn't answer. Wojak hadn't expected him to. The two simply made their way silently across the wrecked tower, hundreds of feet above the inky black waves. Wojak's heart began to beat a bit slower as he jumped off the rusted tower, while rain began to pour down upon them. Both Cheems and Wojak raised their rifles, scanning the courtyard of the massive rig, a monstrous construction of stone and metal raised from the ocean. Wojak thought of it as something rather Lovecraftian in nature, his eyes straining to see the sign held on the massive walls of the facility at the far end of the rig, Neptune City. Wojak read through the heavy blue fog that seemed to permeate the entire structure. Something about the name seeming a bit benign, but regardless, he gripped his rifle a little tighter. Cheems slowly lowered the barrel of his gun and looked toward Wojak.
So, what do you think?
Cheems asked as he nodded toward the vast distance before them. Wojak looked around him, his eyes locking on a truck that was no more than 20 feet away. I think that truck doesn't look civilian, and this rig looks a lot creepier than I thought it would, Wojak answered without lowering his gun. Cheems nodded and began to walk forward when Wojak placed a hand on his shoulder. Cheems turned to see Wojak tapping the thick layered plate covering his torso.
The Reich makes them thicker,
Wojak stated, to which Cheems nodded once more and fell behind Wojak as the two made their way toward the truck. The vehicle certainly wasn't civilian. An American Navistar 7000, painted what Wojak assumed was once a bright white that had now become faded and dull. The tarp around the cargo bed of the truck was now covered in holes, faded more than the truck's paint, though still bore the name Neptune City, with a strange, stylized logo underneath. The two mercenaries casually made their way to the rear of the truck, Wojak quickly releasing the metal tailgate that came down with a rust-coated thud and revealed a small cache of MP5s hidden inside. Cheems picked one up that had been laying on the rusted truck bed. The gun was in about the same condition as the vehicle, but as he pulled the slide back, it was clear the firearm was still usable. Cheems stared at the weapon for a moment, rain splashing off his black helmet before finally speaking up.
Strange company.
What do you think we should do with the other guns? Wojak asked as Cheems looked off toward the side of the rig.
Walk the plank.
Cheems answered, picking up one of the boxes and tossing it off the rig along with the worn machine gun. Together, the two men quickly ensured that no weapons were left behind for anyone who may have felt the need to shoot at the mercenaries who had now begun to scout the rest of the large platform. The three large dish towers they had seen from the outcropping beyond the structure were almost completely engulfed by the eerie blue fog, only the faces of the round metallic structures managing to poke through the unnatural clouds. The towers sat below the main platform on what the two assumed must have been a second lower metal plateau, and beyond that sat a low, flat plain of rock sitting opposite from the second platform. Having finished exploring the central platform, the two mercenaries now stared out at the low field of rocks, what appeared to be rusted-out construction equipment scattered throughout. Wojak thought he could make out the shape of a military Humvee at the edge of the field, almost appearing as if it were about to fall away into the ocean abyss below at any moment. Cheems didn't really seem to care much about the construction yard below them. Rather, his eye was caught by the sudden appearance of a small green light in the corner of his vision. Cheems turned to see what appeared to be a small display panel attached to a large structure on the far side of the rig, softly glowing in the haze of rain and blue fog. He tapped Wojak on the shoulder and pointed to the piercing green light with 2 fingers. Wojak moved, activating the flashlight on his rifle to scan the area around the display panel as the two made their way toward the far end of the rig. A flashlight gave away one's position. The thought stung in Wojak's mind, but being hidden meant nothing if you couldn't see. A military operation depended upon information, constantly taking in new knowledge and reassessing the situation from there. The objective was now not to only scout the rig, but to find a way to contact the outside world to secure a ride off the rig as well. The nervousness began to leave Wojak, despite how high-strung he was. These moments gave him a rush of true life. The two men made it to the panel. It sat perched next to a large blast door. Wojak covered their back as Cheems slung his rifle to inspect the display. Like everything else they had seen on the rig, the display was weathered and worn. Yet still there was a blinking green text cursor on the dusty screen above a yellowed keyboard. Cheems ran his hand along the metal door, dust falling as he did so, barely noticing the rain as it dripped down his helmet. Cheems attempted to look over the keyboard to see if some buttons were worn more than others, feeling how desperate that plan was as he saw they all seemed to be faded equally in what had to have been more than just a few months of lax care. Cheems was about to give up and have them check the satellite dishes when he saw the text upon the screen. "Hello, are you with a rescue crew?" the text read. Cheems froze for a moment. His first glance at the rig had told him that everyone that had been here was dead. A survivor of whatever had happened here was unexpected. He looked up to see a camera at the corner of the door staring down at them as Wojak turned to him. "You good, Cheems?" Wojak asked, clearly growing impatient from standing in the rain before he saw the text on the screen. "A survivor? Can you get him to open the door?" Wojak questioned before turning back around to rescan the flat metal area to their back.
No idea. Just warm yourself.
Cheems replied, subtly gesturing to the camera above them. Wojak's eyes met the camera, looking for longer than he should have, before awkwardly turning back to the open expanse of fog and metal. Cheems waved up at the camera, speaking.
"Hello, can you hear us? Are you able to come to our position?"
He looked down to see a message glowing on the dusty black screen. "I can't hear what you're saying. There's no intercom where I am." Cheems stared at the screen. Could be a trap. Could be a convenient lie. could be the truth, but the truth was rare, and in Cheem's experience, it was always better to assume that you were being lied to. Yes, we are with a rescue crew contracted by the Coast Guard. What is your name and location? How many survivors are with you? Can you come to our position? Cheems typed as Wojak lowered his rifle and leaned back against the metal blast door. Cheems glanced at him, and Wojak spoke. This position's bad, man. We get caught out here, we're gonna die. Gotta get him to open that door. His eyes still scanning the rig. Cheems looked down to see another message. My name is Dr. Richard Weisner. I am trapped within the control room, but the power is out, and only emergency systems are working right now. I can't open your door either. It requires an emergency passcode I do not have, the message read. Cheems thought for a moment. A lie? It didn't matter. Either way, the door wasn't opening. Strange you didn't mention any other survivors, though. Cheems quickly typed, Is there any way we can get to you? Are there any other survivors, and where are they located? Cheems saw another message pop up on the screen. Yes, you'll need to get the power back on. However, you should be careful. There are no other survivors that I'm aware of. We worked on highly classified medical products on this platform, one of which was the blue fog you see around you. When we became trapped here, it slowly drove the staff mad. Any staff members remaining are most likely dangerous. Cheems swore under his breath. Each breath he took was poison. He thought back to how he had almost ordered a gas mask, but thought $150 was too expensive. He had bought a coffee table instead. God says anybody still on this rig is probably insane from fog, Cheems said as he began to type another message. This stuff is gas? Are we going to be okay in it? They didn't say anything about chemicals. Wojak replied, half-heartedly fanning the fog away with one hand. Don't know. Guys being really vague. How do we turn the power back on? Where can we acquire the passcode? Are the staff armed in any way? Can they listen to reason? Or, in your experience, are they too far gone? He typed. They may very well be armed. We had some government contractors guarding the rig. If they are still around, they will attack you. Weapons or not, they cannot be reasoned with. The passcode will be located in one of the satellite towers to your left. Once the door is open, you should be able to turn the power back on inside this building. Cheems hesitated. The situation made less sense by the second. The idea that a company of this size would leave its staff and expensive toys marooned was madness. How these people could have possibly become trapped here was his biggest concern. Perhaps the rig had become too toxic because of the fog, and the company was using them as guinea pigs to test if the air was breathable enough for a salvage operation. Possible, but irrelevant at the moment. Keep the man behind the door on your side, and get off the rig. Stay calm, stay safe. We will get the code and be back as soon as we are able, Cheems typed, before turning, tapping Wojak on the shoulder, and pointing toward the satellite at the lower plateau. They were about halfway to the satellites when Wojak finally asked, So what's the word? Are we looking for a way into the door or comms? Both. Try and get in contact with the outside world, and then get into the facility. Just keep your eyes peeled. Might be crazy people with guns out here. Cheems replied, eyeing the rusted satellite dishes as they moved closer. You trust the survivor? Well, guy isn't telling us everything. Could be lying about the door, and the people who hired us didn't expect any survivors. How do you know that? Did they give us any medical equipment? No. Did they give us a list of staff to check the survivors? No, they didn't. No, they sent 2 armed mercenaries to check and see if they could salvage their precious rig safely. And the guy inside, you think he's lying too? He's telling us as much as he thinks we need to know. I can tell you that much, Cheems stated as the two began to descend a rusted stairwell that led to the lower part of the rig. The stairs creaked and moaned as if they were some eerie specter crying out eternal pain. Any moment Wojak thought they might give way as he scanned over the piles of rusted junk and debris. Rusted scraps of metal, piles of rotted crates, and garbage lay all across this lower level. Yet through that there were narrow paths that led to the satellite tower some 100 yards off. It was then that Wojak saw them, the green glow of animal eyes floating in the fog. Then he heard the dragging sound of something as the eyes moved closer. Don't move! He bellowed, but some other part of his brain overrode this as he saw the eyes shine against his flashlight. No human eye had that sort of effect, and these people were now apparently insane. He put 2 rounds into where he guessed the body would be. The eyes staggered back, but then lurched forward once more. Wojak noticed 2 more pairs of eyes as he fired 3 more rounds into whatever stood before him. The first pair of eyes slumped forward, collapsing to the deck with a loud crash, revealing a human form as it laid before them. Sheems fired a short burst into the pair of eyes to the left, the outline of a man appearing, falling over sideways into a pile of rusted metal as he did so. Wojak turned and fired another 5 rounds into the man-like figure now only 10 feet to his right, and the thing fell into the path before them with a wet slap as rain continued to pour down. Wojak looked to the left and right, making sure that every threat to himself and Sheems was eliminated before moving forward toward the corpses. They were men, emaciated, starved-looking corpses of men, their skin of bluish gray, their flesh loose and thin, worn uniforms decaying on their bodies.
Cover me, I'm gonna check them real quick.
Sheems grunted as he knelt down and began to rifle through the worn uniforms of each man. Wojak knelt behind a rusted forklift as Sheems continued to search. The rig down here was littered with now useless industrial equipment and trash. It was a nightmare. A man with a gun could have been hiding anywhere. One of the corpses had the smart clothes of a professional, a doctor or a manager. The second had that of a utility worker. The third, only a pair of sweatpants. None of them had anything of worth on them. Sheems got back to his feet, tapping Wojak on the back, and the 2 continued their way towards the nearest satellite. The 2 walked up another ancient set of metal stairs to the nearest tower. It was a metal square with a large, dirty glass window that looked out upon the lower plateau, around the size of an average house. Above it loomed the massive, rusted satellite that sprung from the tower, still pointing upward toward the sky. Wojak expected to see the figures of men through the muddled glass as soon as they reached the top of the stairs, but found he couldn't see anything through the thick layer of dust and mud spattered against the window. He quickly moved toward the door of the tower, kicking it open as he and Sheems quickly burst into the room, scanning whatever the other man was not. Once the room was secured, Wojak slammed the door behind them and placed a worn filing cabinet up against the door to ensure that no one else could get in. Sheems immediately began tearing into the hundreds of yellowed papers and several filing cabinets. Wojak stopped guarding the door for a moment and joined Sheems as the 2 began to tear the decrepit room apart. Wojak wrenched a drawer open and found a plastic keycard that looked to be the kind one would use to open a door. On the back of the card, still pristine under the plastic, was the words Emergency Passcode 10 5 23 9 19 8. I think I got it, man. Did you find anything? Wojak asked while holding the key card. Sheems stood there for a moment, staring at a piece of paper before responding.
All is going beyond expectation. The entire platform and staff have been shifted to a mother dimension of reality. We have cramped the code for freight travel. Moscow and Washington may just be but a step away. The problem is with getting off the platform and shifting it back to our own reality. Things can apparently come in. It is objects leaving we are having trouble with. The staff are becoming nervous as there are fewer and fewer visitors and supplies from the outside world. Though with this kind of breakthrough, I do not believe we will have to wait much longer for rescue.
Sheems read before looking up at Wojak, the creaking of the old rig only adding to the irony of the last line. Looks like the gas drove that guy a little insane before he completely lost his mind. Wojak laughed, attempting to break the silence.
How are those guys still alive, man?
Sheems asked, not looking at Wojak, but rather staring off into the corner of the room. Wojak looked back toward the door, as if toward the 3 corpses they left outside. Well, like, people can take a lot before they go down, man, especially if the air is drugged. Wojak trailed off, freezing in place. The rig had been underwater when they arrived.
Those guys with the weird animal eyes could just breathe water?
Immortality, Wojak whispered before meeting Cheem's gaze.
I think we're in a lot more trouble than we're getting paid for, ma'am.
Cheem spoke, stress and worry present in his face. Wojak leaned back against one of the cabinets, rubbing his eyes. You think the fog is affecting us, man?
Nah, I was with the Humanitarian Front in Civil Domain 3 for 4 years, fighting and arresting the same blackguards I've handled and been contaminated by drugs before. I don't think we're impaired.
You were in Old Chicago?
Yeah, South Side had some interesting animals.
James chuckled.
You were there with those German separatists?
Yeah. Free training, a gun, a paycheck, and bad experiences. Cheems held out his fist toward Wojak. The howling of the wind outside, the only thing that filled the silence. Wojak looked down and extended his own hand. A bit of confusion, the two fist bumping.
We both want to get off this rig and go home. We do that by working as a team. You with me?
Wojak nodded, a genuine smile forming on his face despite the chaos of the situation. It had been a long time since he had made a friend. Yeah, I'm with you, man. Doesn't look like any of these radios are going to work here. We better go check the other two towers. Cheems nodded, and the two removed the filing cabinet from the door and began to make their way back down the stairs. The two made their way through the piles of garbage and rust to the next guard tower. A growing feeling of unease settling in Wojak's stomach as they walked with rifles raised. Wojak's flashlight barely pierced the fog and rain, but it at least allowed him to see more than a few feet, and therefore he dared not turn it off. He dared not lose what little vision he had. Then, as they neared the second tower, the flash of green animal eyes, the flash of a rifle firing, Wojak felt the air exit his lungs as he fell to a sitting position right at Cheem's feet. Cheems opened up with his M4, the rapid-fire cannon-like roar of the gun spewing hate toward the things in the fog. Cheems began to reload. Wojak stood automatically, still struggling to breathe, firing at a stumbling figure no more than 3 yards away. The figure went down. Wojak scanned to the left and right, still gasping for air before slumping behind a thin pile of plastic garbage bags filled with mummified food and waste. Wojak kept hold of his rifle and took control of his breathing as he felt where the bullet had hit. Cheems scanning the area with his rifle. He felt it, a vicious dent in his plate just over the right where his stomach met his ribcage. The bullet had not penetrated. Reich makes him thicker. Wojak rose once more to his feet, giving Cheems a thumbs up, both their ears still ringing as they moved off to the satellite tower. Wojak had never been the best soldier, always in the middle of his basic training class and everything, though he had always prided himself with his ability to take pain and drive on through it. Even so, his breathing was shallow, and his head swam a bit as they climbed the stairs. Cheems pulled on the metal fire door. It was locked. He stepped back to face it at an angle, taking the shotgun from behind his back and blasting the lock into shrapnel that darted through the air. The two burst through the door, a shambling thing standing in the center of the room staring at them with an idiot slack-jawed gaze. They hacked it apart with 5.56 as it, and the wrench it had been holding, clattered to the ground. As soon as the room was cleared, Wojak sat back against a desk littered with stacks of papers covered in academic jargon so incomprehensible he was sure it must have truly meant absolutely nothing. He ripped the buckle of his helmet off, letting it fall onto the papers with a wet clunk, and then lifted off his plate carrier. The plate carrier felt heavier than normal, his muscles shaking and tired, his body cold and soaked with rain. He had been in this state before, a kind of weakness that he was used to, and so he powered on, lifting up his black shirt to reveal a deep purple welt the size of a volleyball around his stomach. It was tender to the touch. He didn't check on any of his ribs, couldn't do anything if they were broken. He only prayed his lungs weren't punctured. Wojak lifted the plate and helmet back on, standing back up, the weakness dissipating, now replaced by a dull, tired feeling combined with a humming pain where purple flesh pulsated. Cheems began to rub his temples, pacing back and forth as it seemed that he had a silent conversation with himself.
Okay, we gotta check the next tower just to make sure there's no radio stuff there. But I got a feeling we're gonna be fresh out of luck. Gotta move fast, because we don't know how many of those things are there. Then, get inside that building and secure ourselves there.
Cheems spoke, as much to himself as to Wojak. Wojak simply nodded and rose to his feet. His breathing was better, though not fully back. He prayed it would come back. Nothing else to do, though. Keep moving. Maybe it would get better. Maybe they would get out of here. It was then, for the first time on this mission, that Wojak felt the inky black thought in the back of his mind that they would not leave here alive. That didn't matter either, though. That thought only gave birth to spite, the will to go on, to drag out the end, to not go down silently, and that gave Wojak new strength as the two made their way to the next tower. The rain seemed to come down a little harder now as they climbed the stairs to the third satellite tower. Nothing was in there. Everything looked decrepit and old, only one note of any interest. "I'm scared," it read. Sheem silently agreed. He was scared too. Wojak was shot. Didn't seem bad, but it didn't always seem bad at first. He had seen one man move and fight for 30 minutes before he fell dead and pale, a bullet wound in his foot, the man's boot a puddle of blood. Sheems just moved. Didn't keep his mind on it as the two trudged back to the main plateau of the rig. None of the green eyes could be seen through the fog, the main plateau as clear as when they had left it. Sheems let his rifle down as he approached the glowing panel, the green text reading, "Were you able to acquire the password to enter?" Sheems simply gave a thumbs up in reply as he began to type in the code on the back of the keycard. He glanced up halfway through putting in the code, another message. "It may take a minute for the emergency power to open the door. There's not much, and this equipment has had no maintenance," the message read as Sheems typed in the final digit of the passcode and heard a reassuring machine whir inside the thick metal walls. That's when the wet sound of footsteps reached Sheems' ears. He swung around, a strange thought surfacing in his mind as he did. The steps sounded so normal, as if a dozen different people were running barefoot through the rain. Wojak had opened fire before Sheems had even raised his rifle. The green eyes shone in the illumination of the flashlight on Wojak's G-36. They were coming up over the edge of the plateau that overlooked the rocky field with the construction equipment. Some had rifles, others had pipes and wrenches, but they all had weapons. They both opened up, 3 dropped, a dozen more rose. They began stumbling towards the mercenaries, gunfire from both sides slicing through the air. Both dropped magazines, reloaded, sprayed accurate fire into an enemy that did not stop until absolutely dead. Wojak's ears rang, but he kept shooting, his barrel steaming as the cooling raindrops poured down, and through the steam and the fog he saw it. It was a massive figure, a giant, disproportionate, monstrous, and massive all the same as it thundered toward them with a club of cement in its hand. Wojak acted automatically, his hand reaching for one of the grenades on his rig, pulling it as the pin and safety clattered to the floor. Wojak rolled it toward the creature, not even thinking, acting on mechanical training. Big target, big solution. The shins and feet of the man-beast evaporated as the twitching, bleeding creature hit the ground with a massive, wet, hideous clap. Wojak felt Sheems pull on his shoulder before he shouted into his ear, "Door's open, ma'am, go!" Wojak shook his head, dropping another mag as even more creatures rose in an endless flood. "You go, I'll cover," he shouted. Wojak felt Sheems pulling the back of his carry rig, forcing him through the door. As the things bore down, the two men disappearing into the thick darkness of the facility and out of the gloomy light of the storm. Sheems immediately slammed a panel of buttons as soon as they were through, and any light in the flashlight disappeared as the blast door slid shut, with the green eyes only a yard or so away. The two men now stood, panting, shaking, and eerily alone in the dusty quiet of the dark facility, lit only by Wojak's flashlight. It was utterly still, no air moving, though one could see dust dancing in the eerie yellow light of Wojak's flashlight. Wojak picked up his rifle, slowly standing with childlike caution. Neither man seemed to have the bearing of a soldier at this moment, neither raising their rifles as they slowly looked around the room with Wojak's gunlight. Sheems finally turning on the flashlight on his own rifle, both looking around the facility they now found themselves in. The air seemed to smell of stale death as they slowly began to raise their rifles and began to once more act professionally. A green glow caught Wojak's eye, and he turned to see another monitor on the wall, mirroring the one they had seen outside. This one was coated in an even thicker layer of dust. The whole interior seemed to be, and that is what really made the lies they were told by whoever had hired them sink in. This facility had not been abandoned for a month. and they had certainly not been hired to scout the rig. Though above all, Wojak had the sinking feeling they were not any safer inside this facility. Wojak nodded for Cheems to go toward the new monitor. It looked as though it already had a message waiting for them. I am thankful that both of you were able to make it inside here unharmed. However, to access the facility in its entirety, you still need to turn the power on. It is located in the electrical room in the far left corner of the first floor of the facility. The message read, glowing green upon the screen. Cheems faced away from the blast door, pointing towards the left corner of the building, before looking back at the screen and seeing the message, yes, that exact direction, on the display. So the man behind the screen could in fact see them and hear. Good confirmation on that. Cheems didn't bother looking for the camera this time. Probably was more than one in here. He simply whispered, head toward the back left corner of the building, to Wojak. Wojak moved without hesitation, both men training their rifles where the other was not, as they marched toward a pair of grimy plastic double doors. The pair burst through them as the doors jittered behind them as they marched through what seemed to be a cafeteria. Worn, wrinkled advertisements and work reminders were strewn throughout, with shattered glass sprinkled like snow through much of the floor. Neither paid much mind to the trivial atmosphere of the decrepit room, both consigned to the fact that they were currently trapped within a nightmare. Wojak moved toward a metal door at the far end of the room, with Cheems close behind, both once more bursting through the door and scanning for threats, both nearly falling to the only threat present, the holes in the rusting floor. The angry, monstrous sound of the ever-hungering ocean could now be heard just below them, as the highest waves even lapped water through the holes in the floor, as if the sea itself was scratching at the rig trying to pull it down. The room was obviously empty, and Cheems reached out a hand to grab a support beam, feeling as though he might be sucked down into the depths below. Wojak, on the other hand, splashed through the puddles of salt water and walked toward the mess of wires that seemed to make up the facility's main circuit breaker on the far wall.
Can you fix this thing?
Cheems asked, trying his best not to look down into the holes and into the ocean beyond. Probably. It looks like we just need to trip some breakers and replace part of the wires. Looks like everything we need is still here despite the rust, Wojak answered, looking around at the aged tools lining the wall. It was then as his eyes drifted down to one of several holes that he saw it, the animal glow of eyes peering through the gash in the metal. Wojak had no time to react before the eyes exploded and a deafening shot rang out through the small maintenance room. He felt Cheems slap him on the shoulder before the man frantically pointed toward the circuit breaker, more terrified than Wojak had yet seen him. Wojak began working as fast as he could, his ears ringing as he heard more rounds going off while replacing part of the wiring. He looked back but for a moment and saw one of the lifeless things slumped over on the floor motionless as Cheems continued to fire into the various gashes in the rusted floor. Cheems tried to control his breathing, tried to mask the fear of breaking through the metal floor and being swallowed by the angry ocean below. But with each creak and crack of the floor, his courage began to wane. Things had followed them, some kind of inhuman rage toward the living, driving them onward to kill. Cheems reloaded, now only having 3 magazines remaining in his rig, and blasted 3 rounds into the head of what appeared to be a soldier, gear weathered but still worn. One of the contractors the man behind the door wrote of, not too dissimilar to Cheems himself. Just trying to make a buck. Sorry, friend, Cheems thought before the corpse fell back into the ocean not too far below. It was then that the entire world seemed to explode. Cheems' eyes blinked rapidly to adjust as he realized Wojak had done it. The power was finally on. Cheems felt something grab him on the back of his chest rig as he saw Wojak pulling him towards the exit. He then felt a bony, gnarled hand grab his black leather boot, shaking the thing off and stepping on it as he stood up and bolted out the door with Wojak. Wojak slammed the door behind them as the 2 men piled as many tables and chairs as they could to prevent those things from getting loose inside the facility. Wojak then took the opportunity to look around, rifle at the ready, as if turning on the lights would somehow reveal a once unforeseen enemy. It only revealed all the signs of human death and horror that had taken place in this giant human experiment. The light somehow made the building look worse, all its rottenness now plain to see, no longer concealed in the kind darkness. He then turned to see Cheems reloading as he marched toward the double door to the mess hall.
Hurry up, man. We gotta go find that survivor guy,
Sheems stated, not even waiting for Wojak as he burst out the door. Wojak quickly followed, his chest pinching just a bit with every breath he took as he asked, "What's the big hurry? The guy is trapped."
No, he's not. Not anymore. Guy said power being off was the only thing keeping him trapped. Now we gotta secure him before he can do something weird.
Sheems almost shouted as the two began to climb a set of stairs to the left of the mess hall. Wojak couldn't exactly disagree as he managed to get in front of Sheems as the two reached the top floor of the facility. Waiting for them at the far end of the hall was a Goliath figure like the one outside. Wojak's heart stopped, seeing the motionless thing standing there in the bright, fluorescent lights, and then began beating like a drum as the thing suddenly accelerated toward them with its odd, disjointed gait. Wojak opened up full auto, nearly every round hitting the beast's chest, staggering it a bit before it raised an entire metal office desk above its head like a hammer. Wojak's magazine went dry as the thing swung the desk down, and Wojak fell back, trying desperately to dodge the thing as the desk landed less than a centimeter away from his boots. Sheems then opened fire, turning the thing's head into chunks of meat as it folded like paper and fell to the floor. Sheems helped hoist Wojak to his feet and hurried them both forward, passing an armory and seeing a sign on the wall pointing down a narrower hallway reading Facility Control Center, exactly what they were looking for. The two men flew down the hallway, rifles at the ready, and there they saw something working at a small computer in the darkness of the large room. The thing was coated in armor like something out of science fiction, bulky and sturdy, yet his fingers moved with the grace of a piano player.
I hope you'll forgive me, gentlemen, but the lights in this facility were murder on my eyes. I was forced to turn them off in this room after all your hard work.
The voice spoke deeper, far more masculine than Sheems had expected, yet with a petulant edge to it.
Interesting attire, Dr. Wisemer,
Sheems replied, rifle at the ready.
Well, I did not want to die upon just being released, Sheems.
The doctor scoffed at the name.
And well, you never really trusted me, and I certainly never trusted you too.
You could hear us the whole time.
Smart man, though not smart enough to know where we are, what this place is, or to stay out of this whole business entirely. However, on that last point, I believe we are both two of a kind.
The doctor sighed as he pressed one last button on his keyboard and finally turned his chair to see them face to armored face. What happened here? Wojak spoke up, spreading out from Sheems just a bit as he noticed a rifle-shaped device next to the doctor.
A great leap forward. History, indescribable achievements in the history of our species happened. We shifted into another dimension, the entire rig in the bubble of a time all of its own. The possibilities with this kind of invention were and still are enormous. Though as ancient man knew, as we still know, we do not get such gifts without sacrifice.
Dr. Wisner answered, his hands of iron gripping the arms of his chair just a little tighter.
You and everyone else on this facility were trapped here. They left you all here to starve.
Sheems nodded, lowering his rifle just a bit.
Oh, and if that were the worst of it, gentlemen, the fact that we couldn't get any of us back into our own dimension was bad enough. Anxiety growing among the crew every day, yet we were all the best and the brightest. As long as some supplies kept coming in from the outside world, we would no doubt have survived and found a way out. But this is no movie, and a happy ending was not what we got.
The doctor answered, his speech beginning to sound just slightly erratic.
The gas, the blue fog, leaked and the company couldn't get to you. They had to abandon you and the rig.
At this, the armored doctor lurched forward in his chair as if spasming.
That is not what happened. That is not what happened. That is not! Time fluctuates in here. And wherever we are, sometimes it's slower, sometimes it's faster. It could have taken the company a month, 5 minutes a day, but none of that matters.
The doctor sighed, seeming almost manic before continuing.
They leaked the gas on purpose. They sent in a new maintenance worker with the last food shipment. and told him to release the gas that would free us.
Wojak looked over at a small capsule at the corner of the room that read Emergency Isolation Room on a rusted sign above. He saw scratching on the glass window of the capsule, blood stuck to its dingy white walls before he looked back toward the doctor. "How long were you trapped in there?" Wojak asked with a deadpan voice, his rifle never lowering.
3 years and 2 days. Starving, going bad, and all the while working on how to escape this place.
"But you should be dead,"
Sheems spoke, his eyes betraying the disgust and horror at the situation before him. "Immortality," Wojak whispered, the animal eyes of those things filling his memories.
That is what our employers wanted. I was trapped in here with only a small amount of the gas inhaled. My mind stayed intact just enough to work. Just enough to understand the horror I was hearing around me as my friends screamed for death. And it never came. All the while they lost themselves. Some of the ones who had died before had even coming back. And those ones screamed all the louder. Screaming of hell, damnation, and the machines the devil wrought to torture those in his domain.
Dr. Weisler explained, his words leaving a cold silence filling the room, as at this point, both Sheems and Wojak believed him.
They want to live forever, to avoid the hell they deserve. But I'll give them an even greater hell. We all will.
Dr. Weisner said, as the whole rig began to rumble.
"What did you do?"
Sheems asked, his rifle now back up.
In another dimension, we could test whatever we wanted. Missiles, chemical weapons, you name it. As one last act of defiance, my colleagues loaded the fog onto our last remaining test missile. Though they still could not figure how to get the missile out of this dimension of reality before they lost their minds. But after 3 years stuck in that pod, I can cover at least a quarter of the planet in the fog with just one missile. And the people who damned us, they'll pay. The world will cease, and this new flood will wipe away our sins and theirs.
You can't just do that. It'll turn millions of random people into those things from outside, Wojak shouted, a conscience that he tried to leave off now springing back to life.
As animals, as beasts, never dying, never experiencing hell. The world will be wild again, both paying for what it has created and being saved all at once. Our achievements finally bringing about a true judgment, a true salvation.
The doctor exclaimed as if he were a minister.
"A great calling to take us all back to a time before the machine, before we were slaves to industry,"
James replied, completely lowering his gun. At this, the doctor leaned forward, his attention fully on James.
You know of these things.
"The Industrial Revolution and its consequences, yes, I know. But what you're saying is you are going to make man no more than a beast. That's exactly what the Industrial Revolution already did, made us cattle,"
James answered, taking a casual step toward the doctor. At this, the armored doctor seemed to grow angry, saying,
You can't even grasp that's all you people are. Beasts, cattle. I'm just going to set you free. If it's not me, then who? Who sets mankind free and punishes people for doing this to me?
The doctor now screamed. "Not one man with a button," Wojak replied, rifle leveled at the doctor's head.
You know what I think?
The doctor answered, leaning back in his chair.
I think you two are just some shit-kicking mercenaries who came here to salvage some equipment and never gave a shit about the people who tore each other apart on this platform.
Dr. Weisner raged, grabbing the rifle-shaped thing at his side and leaped to his feet. Wojak and then Sheems began firing as soon as the doctor moved, 5.56 bouncing off his armored suit like BBs off steel. Before the doctor leveled his weapon to fire, Wojak looked at Sheems and shouted, "That armory, go!" Sheems wasted no time and let his M4 clatter to the ground as he ran toward the armory. Then, the doctor's weapon lit up the entire floor with a foul green lighting, that struck Wojak square in his chest, yet did not hurt him. Wojak, amazed to still be alive, replied with his final grenade, rolling it at the doctor's feet as the armored man attempted to clumsily avoid the small explosive. The grenade exploded before the doctor could get clear and sent him tumbling across the room. But this only left Wojak horrified as the armored man immediately rose back up, only a small bit of blood streaming from his armor. Dr. Wisner retorted with several blasts from his strange rifle, each making Wojak's body feel a strange warmth as he returned fire with his G-36. Then, in an instant, the room was nothing more than an orange light. Wojak stood there, blinded, deafened, and confused before his senses finally returned. He saw the doctor, half of him, collapsed and melting into the floor. A massive hole cut clean through the wall behind him. Cheems was at the computer with some large RPG-shaped weapon on the ground next to him. The computer obviously broken from the grenade explosion, pressing buttons out of anger, trying to stop the launch. He then turned toward Wojak, making his way over with a look of concern on his face. Wojak attempted to take a step forward before vomiting on the floor, Cheems helping him stay on his feet. He hit me with some weird green light, man, Wojak huffed before standing up straight on shaky legs. What's worse is that launch sure can't be stopped from here, man. Computer's fried, that thing's gonna fly, Cheems replied, helping to steady his friend. Oh man, no it's not, Wojak answered, pushing Cheems aside and rushing down the stairs, with Cheems then following close behind. They opened the door through which they had entered the facility to find the creatures gone, replaced now by the tip of the missile slowly but surely rising out of the center of the metal plateau. Wojak's eyes darted back and forth until he saw a chain and hook rusting on the ground attached to the wall of the facility. He grabbed it, rushing toward the missile as Cheems screamed for him to stop. He saw a gap in the body of the missile and leaped to hook the chain in. He succeeded just as the rocket began to fire, and the flames and heat bursting forth and roasting his hands in seconds. He fell back screaming in agony as the missile's rise was halted by the one rusting chain. James then began firing into the body of the missile, Wojak taking out his Glock and letting 2 rounds fly before dropping the thing in paralyzing pain. Wojak looked up. It all seemed to move so slowly now. The missile began to turn and fall back toward the rig. He wasn't sure what would happen now. He hoped Jesus would forgive him. His mom told him he would. Wojak was always scared, though. His mind was always on rotten things. He was scared that Jesus would know the kind of man he really was. He looked at Cheems, the 2 men watching one another, as they disappeared into the white light that came as the missile finally fell. Out in an old abandoned parking lot with only one yellowed streetlight to illuminate the 2 aging cars still sitting there, 3 young Latino boys attempted to try their hand at breaking into cars. They were rusted messes that had sat there for years without anyone bothering to claim them, so the boys all figured it would be harmless fun to see what was in them, all except for Isaac, who pulled his beanie down a little lower as he thought of what his father would do if he caught him and his friends out here. His friend Angel handed him the small crowbar they had borrowed from Angel's unwitting father. "Come on, man, don't be a little bitch. Just take it and smash the window," he said, shoving the crowbar into Isaac's hands. "Angel, don't talk like that. I'm not gonna do it, man. You do it," Isaac replied, as Angel rolled his eyes and began to wail on the window of the old Honda with the tiny crowbar. Just as he made it through, the boys all looked out into the dark, inky blackness of the ocean to see a small flash, like a candle, shifting wildly in the breeze. Then a larger flash, followed by a deep boom as the boys felt a strong wind push them back. Without a word, Isaac began to walk home, leaving his friends staring in awe at whatever they had just seen happen on the ocean. Hoping against hope his parents never found out what he and his friends had been doing down here.